Yeah, so in case we haven't met, my name is Arthur City, and we're starting a new series tonight called How Not to Fall in Over Views, which I think could be really interesting, actually. Really interesting thing to explore. I'm quite looking forward to seeing what comes out and exploring it with all of you. Yeah, what to say about this? Well, I think it's a I don't know what you feel, but I think it's a bit of a sort of characteristic of our times. There are sort of quite defined views in the world, aren't there? Quite strongly expressed, of course, with social media being what it is, those views are kind of, it's much easier to sort of get them out. They sort of travel much quicker than they used to when we just had newspapers. It's not difficult to be slightly alarmed by some of the views that are around. It's not difficult to even kind of spend a lot of time thinking about some of the views without even having met any of the people that hold those views, for example. So I think certainly that's been the case in my life. This has not been so fully the case in the past, actually. Now it seems like there's greater sort of polarization where people, sort of different groupings, hold different views, and those groupings, those people don't seem to be able to come into communication about them, which is just slightly alarming. That is the case. So that seems to increasingly so to be a feature of the world that we live in. And interestingly, it was a feature of the world that the Buddha lived in. Perhaps slightly different, but it's interesting to know that, isn't it? That actually the world that the Buddha lived in was a highly contentious world, the sort of spiritual ferment, and there were all sorts of views and people falling out left, right, and centre over them. And the Buddha encountered one such person who came to find him out, called Dandapani, bearer of the stick. Now, in the scriptures, often when someone's bearing a stick, it means they like to kind of beat people with it. So I don't know if that was a kind of nickname or whether it's, anyway, he's someone who seemed to fall out with people. And he asked the Buddha, so what is your doctrine? Kind of trying to corner the Buddha into some sort of falling out. And the Buddha, he'd never said this before, as far as I'm aware, said, my doctrine, friend, is that which leads to no quarreling with anyone in the cosmos. So check that out. That's quite interesting. So there's this thread within the Buddha's teaching, which is basically saying my teaching conduces to concord. So we're seeing a lot in the world sort of views that seem to be more and more divisive. It almost feels like to hold a view, to say anything, means falling out, inevitably sort of falling out with somebody at some point. That's not the Buddha's perspective. So that's why we wanted to sort of look at what does the Buddha have to say about views? What does he have to say about views? How is it that his teaching can be that which conduces to concord? How can that be? It seems quite extraordinary, actually, doesn't it? And I'm just going to get us started with that. The whole 6 weeks we're going to be exploring this. But it feels a bit of a risk to explore this, actually. I don't know if the title of my talk is why even good people fall out. So let's see if we get through the evening without kind of falling out. But yeah, it feels very pertinent, very relevant to be trying to unfold what the Buddha has to say in this area. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what the Buddha has to say about view. What do we actually mean by a view? And then in the second half, look at so why is it we fall out? Everything. Why is it even good people fall out over views? So where to start with this. Okay, so here's a definition, if you call it that. The views are how we organize and interpret the raw data of our experience. Views are how we organize and interpret the raw data of our experience. Probably weren't expecting that, were you? So what on earth does that mean? Well, I don't know if you ever come across this, but there's a blind man, a man who was blinded at the age of 3 by a freak accident, called Mike May. In 2000, when he was 46, he had an operation which gave him his sight back. Wonderful opportunity that modern science made possible. The thing is, when he got his sight back, he still couldn't walk down the street. He still couldn't negotiate curbs. He couldn't differentiate men's faces from women's faces. When he saw people moving away from him, what he saw, his experience of that, was people getting smaller. Yeah. So despite the fact that his eyesight had been restored, he couldn't make intelligible sense of the raw data, the raw visual data that was coming in to his eyes. So what they've realized is that actually it's not as simple as sight. It's not a simple sort of case of the sense impressions just falling into the eye. Actually, what we're doing when we're small is we're slowly building up a picture. We're slowly building a view. This sort of labeling of experience is essential to actually being able to make sense of your visual world. So that happens over years. It was cut short with him at 3, and he's never managed to regain it fully. So he still has to use a stick when he walks down the street. He can't work out, he hasn't got the sort of perceptual kind of apparatus in the brain to work out how to negotiate a curve. Yeah, it doesn't know what size it is. It might fall over if it goes off it. So isn't that really, really fascinating? So apparently that state is called agnosia. That's a new word. I've never come across that. Agnosia, where we can't actually make sense of the visual data that's coming in through our eyes. But what this is getting at is that the raw experience that we're having now, it seems, doesn't it, like we're just seeing things as they are. That's what it kind of seems like. You know, if I talk about what I'm seeing, then of course we need to use concepts. But you know, when I see Samudradosha, I just see Samudradosha. I just kind of see things, experience things as they are, and that is not true. That is not true. We need to interpret. So there is this essential sort of organizing, interpreting of our visual inputs. So I hope that goes some way to explaining how views are how we organize and interpret the raw data of our experience. And it's language that sort of enables us to do this to a much, much greater extent. We can label our experience, interpret and make sense of our experience. Now, of course, that's a simple sense perception that we're talking about there, but actually this need reaches much deeper into our experience, extends much further into our experience. Views organize and interpret far beyond labeling simple sense experience. So, you know, just kind of what's going on at work, you know, all the complexities of that dynamic, you have sort of interpreted that, you've come to an interpretation. What is that interpretation? So maybe views can be about a particular situation, or they may extend further than that. Our views may be about the meaning and purpose of life. So views sort of extend in all of our experience, running from simple sense experience to kind of making sense of what's going on at work to what is the meaning and purpose of life. Yeah. So just to add a little bit more about this, so it's helpful to say that views sort of organise and interpret the raw data of our experience, and it's a little bit more than that. Actually, our views shape how that experience unfolds. Our views shape how that experience unfolds. They're not just a sort of passive organising, reorganising of experience, depending on what view. They actually shape how our experience unfolds. So just to say a bit more about this. So an example for me is related to my experience of being vegetarian or becoming vegetarian. So my first encounter with vegetarianism to any degree was my cousin Sarah. When we go for these big family gatherings, she would say, "Oh, I'll have the vegetarian option." I'd heard of vegetarianism before that, I'm sure, but that was sort of my first encounter, at least with a vegetarian. So there were big family gatherings, and you could get good food. You know, there was kind of your granddad was going to buy, so you could choose something on the menu. And, what was I going to choose? And there was that awful experience when you hadn't chosen the right thing. You know, it was pretty good, but it wasn't as good as what your brother had. Yeah. So and there was cousin Sarah eating vegetarian, and I kind of admired that. Actually, I thought, yeah. Vegetarian, but I didn't become a vegetarian. I didn't become a vegetarian at that point. So that was my first encounter, and then I went along to the Buddhist Center. I've been going along a number of I don't know, weeks, months, and somebody, I knew that they were vegetarians, and some of them, I can't remember who. Someone said to me, "Well, maybe it's not having a good effect on you, or it's not having a good effect on you, that you feel the sort of values of vegetarianism, not to act in accordance with that ethical impulse might not be so good for you." They just said that in a quite sort of non-pushy kind of way. They just proposed that, and that, for some reason, kind of got me wanting to try being vegetarian. So I tried it. And to my astonishment, I actually felt better. So previously, I'd had that experience that I referred to of cousin Sarah, but I concluded I admire vegetarians, but I couldn't be a vegetarian. I like the taste of meat too much. That was my conclusion. That was the opinion that I came to. And there I was, not eating meat, becoming vegetarian, and I found that actually it was a relief. I found that I enjoyed it more, and I found it wasn't difficult at all to be vegetarian. So what's really interesting about these two snapshots is that there's no change of values. My values haven't changed. I admired vegetarians. I thought that was a good thing, being a vegetarian, both instances. All that had changed was my view. I've been offered this new view that maybe to act on your ethical impulses is kind of good for you too. My previous view was something along the lines of kind of fear of missing out. That if I don't eat the vegetarian option, which frankly looked pretty rubbish, cousin Sarah, this was back, 30 years ago or something like that. It did not look very good. So, and I had sort of foregone things that I liked. And my experience was that you're not very happy. You feel like you're missing out. So my experience seems to confirm my conclusion. Yeah. But then I was offered this new view, and the experience that I had was different. The experience that I had was one of this sort of freedom from a certain tension, freedom from the tension of not acting in accordance with my sort of better judgments, if you like, my sort of ethical impulses. So isn't that really, really interesting? That actually all that changed was a view. I was offered a different view. And in that new view, experience seemed to unfold in a different way. So what happens with view is it kind of minimizes and amplifies different aspects of our experience. So what was amplified in the first was, you're not getting that. And within that view, that was my experience. I felt like I was missing out when I didn't, get what I wanted, get my first choice sort of thing. That was what it amplified. What it minimized was actually that was leaving me with another tension. That was kind of completely minimized by the view, which this new view may be not acting in accordance with your ethical impulses is actually having an adverse effect on you. That highlighted, it steered my attention towards that aspect of my experience. And consequent on that, I became a vegetarian overnight, really. I didn't really need to think about it. There was a bit of follow through, but I was convinced. I was convinced by my own experience. But that experience, can you see how actually our view is not just a sort of passive thing? Actually, it determines how our experience unfolds. Yeah. So views shape experience rather than merely sort of organizing experience. This is not how we tend to think about views. We tend to think that experience is kind of beyond question, it's reliable. View is merely a commentary on it, yeah, and it could change. It's not the case. It's not the case, folks. Actually, view conditions, determines how our experience unfolds. So what's more, it's really, really hard to see these views. Just as with our sense experience, it seems like we're just seeing things as they are. It's really, really hard to notice what our views are. These views, as you can see, these views are actually operative in perception, in our perceiving of experience. So they may be completely non-discursive. We can also think and opinionate, can't we? But these views are not sort of thought through, they're just operative in our experience. So nonetheless, they're like a lens. But instead of being like glasses, where you can see them, oh yeah, I've got these on, they're internal. They're like lenses that are sort of internal to our perception. Yeah, so they're very, very hard to see, and we'll tend to think that we're not perceiving with a view. We'll tend to think that's just my experience, and that is what people argue, isn't it? That is my experience. That was my experience. That if I'm vegetarian, I'll be missing out. That was my experience. My experience seemed to, confirm my view. When I changed my view, experience unfolds in a different way. It actually seems to sort of confirm. My experience seems to confirm the new view. Yeah. So view is a really, really, it's very, very hard to see, but it's determining, right now, it's determining how we experience our life. Yeah, so you'll get people arguing, that is my experience. Well, is it? Is it your experience? There will be some sort of view in there which is shaping your experience, yeah? So I hope that's gone some way to sort of explaining what view is in Buddhism. So and undoing this idea that view and experience are distinct. Actually, that's a false dichotomy. View is operative in experience. You can see why we come to conclude that view and experience are different, because we can think, so we can theorize and opinionate about experience. But so theory is different. Theory is distinct from experience, but view is actually involved in both theory and experience. Yeah. So that's what the Buddha's kind of getting at with view. So I thought I'd just pause there. Just to see if there's any sort of questions or it's probably not. Don't worry, you have the aren't. Let's just check time. No, nothing particularly bubbling up. Jolly good. Okay, well, oh yeah.
So maybe hopefully I'm not jumping the gun.
Yeah.
I'm about to say. But so are you saying that in a way this Buddhist view, maybe a bit different sometimes how the word view is used,
yeah,
that it's not just a cognitive idea, that there's a sort of an affective and emotional aspect to the idea of Buddhist view? Or am I jumping the gun?
You might jump the gun. In a way, I don't know exactly what people are going to go into over the next number of weeks. Yeah, I don't think that is exactly what I'm saying. Actually, just this instant. I mean, I think that is, yeah, that is true, isn't it? But more what I was getting at was simply that. That actually view is sort of operative in our experience, is sort of shaping our experience. Yeah, but you're filling it out just a little bit more, perhaps. Yeah, I won't go further into that just this week. Yeah, definitely. Okay, well let's go further into why even good people fall out over views. That was a bit too long to include in the title, but that's what I meant. Okay, so we got this word good, and I looked it up in the dictionary to make sure I know what the word means, or how we use it at least. And so this word good is talking about kind of moral behavior. When someone's good, we're talking about their moral character, talking about ethics. And I think that's really important. I know that's kind of really obvious, but I think that's really important that we're talking about action with goodness, because increasingly we live in a world where we don't really know how many people are acting. We live in a world where our experience of each other, our contact with each other is seriously attenuated as compared with in the past. So this is the breakdown of community. It's the effect of our online world. Apparently, according to research, we're in contact with roughly the same number of people on average, 200 people, the size of a village. That's how many we're in contact with. But the nature of that contact is vastly attenuated, such that what we get with people largely is their opinions. What we get is opinions. That's our contact with that village of people, actually. So that's a shift just in my lifetime. That actually nowadays we may not know how, on a day-to-day basis, on a week-by-week basis, how our friends in our contact list actually are acting, but we know how they opinionate online. So the way we're evaluating actually these days is more about opinion. It's more about opinion than it is about action. See if this kind of fits with your experience. But that's how I've been reflecting just on how life has changed in my lifetime. We're also exposed to kind of a much greater range of opinions, but that's another thing. So I think this is kind of problematic, actually. There are people who I am friends with, who I work with, who, were we to meet online, we would not be friends. We would not be friends. If we were just to opinionate online, we would not be friends. Isn't that extraordinary, actually? That here I am working with someone who is a good person. They've got different opinions from me. But if we were to meet online, I wouldn't know that. How can I tell if someone's a good person online? Well, from what they write, from their opinions. Were I to do that with this person, we would not be friends. Yeah. So that's kind of rather a kind of interesting sort of situation, isn't it? What instead we get is a world in which this kind of question of who's good and who's not is mediated through kind of opinion, through virtue signaling. There's this term, isn't there? Virtue signaling. That's a new word to me. I wouldn't know what that meant a few years ago. Yeah, but this kind of this sort of showing who you are online, showing how good you are online, and it's more concerned with being seen to be good than how I act. That's the issue with virtue signaling, that we can present ourselves as good when actually we're not acting in that way. Yeah, if you really want to find out if someone is good, you need to live with them. You need to have extended contact, repeated contact with them. That's how you can find that out. So, kind of in this world of sort of opinions being much more prominent, we very, very easily we kind of pick up views, don't we? We pick up sort of off the peg views. Actually, a lot of the world is off the peg views. Political views are off the peg views. We haven't really thought them through thoroughly. They've been kind of presented to us, and we kind of pick them up, pick up these kind of off the peg views. You may disagree with that. I think that is the case. I think that's true. Yeah, so in a way, our views sort of become badges, a little bit like sort of badges. We say, I'm this type of person, and then we end up sort of getting together with these types of people, don't we? There's that other term, echo chamber. We can just spend our life with people who agree with us. Very, very tempting thing to do. Who can knock it? Well, the Buddha. Yeah. So, let's just keep an eye on time. So I think it's an uncomfortable area, this that actually largely our views are sort of passively absorbed. We have a sort of Western illusion is that we think things through for ourselves, and I'm sure in a lot of ways we do. But the research says that actually the decisions we make are much more conditioned by the people around us than sort of self-determined. I haven't got that research in front of me actually, but that's what I've seen to research. And I think it can be a bit of a sort of, oh no, I think things through by myself. That's a bad thing to sort of to just absorb views, but I'll come on to that in a minute. Yeah, but most of our views are probably sort of passively absorbed. They're probably unthought out. And they may even be contradictory. So if I think of myself, that, you know, what were those views that led me to not be a vegetarian, just decide against my ethical impulses not to be a vegetarian? Well, there was this view, sort of FOMO, kind of fear of missing out. There was that view. But kind of akin to that is, or, you know, our views are a whole sort of pattern, aren't they? Patterning through which we sort of see the world. Actually, that view doesn't really sort of hold up to scrutiny, does it? Because actually I was missing out on the experience of being vegetarian as well. It's quite sort of unthought out. But it kind of, another view in there is just this one, that actually what life is about is sort of increasing our sort of sense experiences, just more and more kind of sense experiences. That was sort of in there too. Now that was probably a view that I would have contradicted with my opinion. I would have said, no, that's not what life's about. But I have nonetheless sort of absorbed it. Yeah. So we've absorbed all sorts of views we may not even agree with. We probably don't. So that's the state that we're in all too often. And that view that I picked up that turned me into a vegetarian, I hadn't thought that out either. That was unthought out. I just picked up this, maybe it's not, you know, it's not such a good, or maybe it'd be good to act in accordance with your ethical impulses. Okay, I'll try that. That was about the the extent of my thinking it through. But it led to me becoming vegetarian. Now that is a good thing, I would say, acting to benefit, protect life. So isn't that interesting? Actually, it was just sort of fairly passively absorbed, kind of consciously, somewhat consciously, but nonetheless, I didn't really think it out. But it led to me being a better person. It led to being a good person. So let's not knock kind of just absorbing views. Actually, it's happening all the time. We entertain views. I think that's closer to what's going on. We entertain them like guests. There's one view operative, and then we kind of pass it on. Another view operative, and we're kind of absorbing them all the time. We do have our own habits, habitual views, but actually we sort of entertain views. So let's not knock that, because that was a real sort of turning point actually in my ethical life. I started to get what Buddhist ethics was really about, but it was not thought out. So that's what I'm kind of getting to. So good people, we can be acting quite ethically, really quite ethically, but the views on which the views helping us do that might be quite unthought out. Yeah. And if our views are unthought out, when somebody else comes with a different view, we'll feel that we are right, but we won't be able to explain it very well. Yeah, we'll run up against our sort of our relatively superficial understanding of why we're right. Yeah, you may be right, you may actually be right, but you get so worked up because you can't actually explain what you think. So, so just the last little point I want to make is about how we hold views. So over these next 6 weeks, really we're going to be exploring what the Buddha has to say about how to think, actually. And exploring it through this path of this progressive path of wrong view, right view, no view. Yeah. Now that might sound quite sort of black and white terminology. Actually, it's not. It's very far from it. And I'm not going to go into it now because we're going to go into it over the coming weeks. But next week, Kula Priya is going to be exploring how do we evaluate views. So we've got a whole different load of views to choose from. How do we actually evaluate those views. Oh, yeah, that's an aspect of thinking, isn't it? The Buddha's got some really, really interesting things to say about that. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be exploring. And it's a whole thing, this wrong view, right view, no view. You can't really understand what the Buddha's getting at with wrong view unless you understand why he's suggesting that the culmination of the path is no view. Yeah, so we actually need to understand the whole thing in order to sort of really get at this. Really, we need to see, in order to be able to think, we need to see that ultimately we need something beyond view in our vision of existence. We need a vision of the world, a vision of life that is direct. It's not, it takes us beyond view, it's unmediated by view, actually kind of beyond space and time, in order to be able to kind of think locally. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that, but we'll go into that right at the end of the course, the series. What I want to go into is that how we hold our views actually determines whether they're right or wrong. Really, really interesting point. I've never encountered that before we came across Buddhism. So how we hold a view determines whether it's helpful, whether it reflects reality well, or whether it's unhelpful and distorts reality, how we hold it. So if we hold to a view tightly, insistently, then it will turn what could be a right view into a wrong view, what could be a helpful view into an unhelpful view. Isn't that an extraordinary kind of thing to say? We may unfold that more over the coming weeks. But what I'd share from my own experience with this is that what I can see in my own experience that there's an inverse relationship between insistence and depth or fullness of understanding. So the more insistent I am about a view, if I find myself kind of pushing, insisting, actually over time what I discovered is that is evidence of lack of depth of understanding. It feels like I do understand. It feels like I know this, and I may even be right, but I don't understand it very fully, very deeply. When I have come to understand, when I have put in the time, and it's a lot of time to actually understand things. Often we don't have the patience to really go deep enough to understand things. Speak for myself anyway. If I do put in the time, I come to a place of kind of confidence about the view because I understand it. And I don't feel, I then in that position don't need to insist. If people disagree, that's fine. I'm not sort of fazed by that. I'm okay for someone to sort of say, no, you're wrong. That's fine. That's fine. If I'm not, if I feel the need to sort of insist, it indicates a sort of lack of fullness of understanding. That's been my experience. You can see it in your own experience. So when I'm holding tightly and I'm insisting, I may have a good point. I may well have a very, very good point. But the insistence actually pushes it into an unhelpful view, both for me and for other people. It leads to me falling out with people, for example. But actually, the Buddha is saying it leads to a sort of skewed understanding, a sort of narrowing of understanding of the actual situation. So this I find really, really interesting, that what the Buddha is saying is, oddly, that the same attitude we need to come into communication with someone of a differing view is the same attitude we need to come to a deeper understanding. Yeah, the same attitude we need, this attitude of confidence, of openness that permits communication between people of different views is the same attitude required to actually deepen our understanding, to come to deeper understanding. So this is kind of the ideal of Sangha, really. This is what we're really trying to do at the Cambridge Buddhist Centre. We're trying to come together in a new way. We're trying to come together so that, in Sangharakshita's terminology, we can discuss rather than argue. Little aphorism of his for order members is discuss, don't argue. So by arguing, he means when we insist upon our point of view. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. It's just noticing, and look, I'm kind of insisting. We can use that as a trigger to acknowledge we don't fully understand what we're talking about. We have some understanding, we don't fully understand it. That's really, really helpful sort of trigger indicator. Yeah, but arguing is when we insist. We want to be right. That's our main objective, actually. So we want to push that person into a corner. That's what argument is about. Instead of arguing, we can discuss. That way we can, even if you come out of a discussion wrong, you've come to a deeper understanding. That's what we're really kind of trying to do. And you come to a deeper understanding, not just of yourself, but also of the other person's sort of point of view. That's the ideal of what we're trying to do at the Cambridge Buddhist Centre. It's quite a demanding ideal. But with the world as it is, can you see how important it is that we make that effort? Can you see how important it is that actually we try and be friends so that we can be friends with people whose opinions are completely different from us? We can kind of bridge those unbridgeable gaps that we see written across the internet. We see dividing neighbours who've been friends for years simply over kind of political opinion. Yeah, that's what we can do at the Buddhist Centre. That's what the Buddha means. Something of what the Buddha means when he says, "My doctrine is that which that which leads to not dispute.
Concord.
Yeah, that which leads to concord. I've got it on my phone. I've got it on the internet. He says, "The source of doctrine, friend, where one does not keep quarrelling with anyone in the cosmos." That's what Buddha's teaching is. The source of doctrine, friend, where one does not keep quarrelling with anyone in the cosmos. Yeah. Great. Okay, so let's we'll go into groups now, and you can explore anything that's caught your interest, of course. But you might particularly want to explore for yourself. Have you ever fallen out? Have you ever fallen out with a good person? And why is that? Yeah, is there something to this? This kind of point that we perhaps don't fully understand, full breadth and depth, what we're talking about, what we're discussing. Also, this fact that actually view is what enables us, kind of going right back to the beginning. View is what enables us to get over our agnosia. What must that be like when we can't make sense of our, the visual data that's coming into our worlds? Very, very perplexing. There's someone who committed suicide over it a long, long time ago because they were totally confused. They couldn't understand why. That was their experience. Well, view creates cosmos out of the chaos. So when someone shakes your view, the general tendency is to try and stamp harder on the ground to sort of firm it up. View sort of creates cosmos. So if someone shakes, it can be very, very unsettling.